There we are. We've gone live now. So welcome everyone to our webinar. It's the first of our New Look webinar program. This is an Ask the Expert webinar. We're going to be kicking off in 10 minutes time, and we're going to be looking at the topic of building customer feedback into the contact center. I'm Jonty Pearce. I'm the editor of Call Center Helper. If you're not already logged into one of our other webinars, we've got a fascinating range of topics, and in 2 weeks' time we'll be looking at the robots are coming, the future of customer service in a robot age, and increasing levels of automation. Just delighted to introduce to you our panelists on today's call. Delighted to welcome to you Dan Moross. Dan is from Moo, which, do you want to explain, Dan, what Moo is all about?
Sure. So we are a very design-focused online business stationery printer based in London. We're about 10 years old, and we've now got offices, 3 in the US and 2 in the UK. And our primary product is selling business cards to hopefully lots of you who are listening in today.
And it's very funky designs you've got on your site. It sort of seems to be sort of quite you can come out with quite a stylish product rather than having to design everything yourself from scratch.
Yeah, it's a good mix of content that we've generated that we think looks good, but also customers, are encouraged to design their own stuff, and we'll help them along the way if they need any help with that as well.
Wonderful. And you run a contact center within Moo. How large is the contact center, Dan?
So combining customer success and customer services, we've got a team of about 80, which is split 60% in the US and 40% in the UK. But we're also, from the UK, we're speaking French, German, Italian, and Spanish.
Wow, so quite a multilingual center as well.
Absolutely. So we have about 60% of our business is in the US generally, and then the UK side of the business is split about 25% in Europe, and the other half, I say 25%, that's a quarter. Half of our EU traffic is from the continent, and the rest is from the UK.
Excellent. And delighted also to introduce Sam Richardson from Ember Services, a well-known contact center consultancy. Sam, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to join.
So you're out and about on the road a great deal, visiting lots of contact centres. Any notable ones that you've visited recently?
Well, yeah. I mean, we work with a huge variety of customers, which is partly what makes the job so interesting. So, people from John Lewis through to Birmingham City Council, to large retailers, pension companies, so all sorts of different organisations, really.
Excellent. And we've also got online, we've got Megan Jones from Call Center Helper.
Hello, it's nice to be here joining the call today.
Hi, nice to have you along. And you're going to be keeping an eye on the chat room of all.
Yeah, I'm quite excited to hear what the audience have to say today on this topic.
Wonderful. Well, a bit of housekeeping. If you well, to see us, you probably would have already clicked the play button here. But if you want to get the chat log, there's a little button here, or there's a button to make the video window bigger if you wanted to do that. So I'm going to start off by asking the question of everyone in the audience, and that is, where are you dialing into today? So Dan, you're calling in from London?
That's correct, in trendy Shoreditch.
Ah, Shoreditch, very up and coming,
yes.
very trendy. And Sam, you're calling from quite a way away.
Yeah, Lincoln equally as up and coming and trendy, I'll have you know, and very sunny today as well.
Wonderful. Let's have a look at the chat room. Megan, who have we got calling in from different places in the chat room?
Okay, we've got Rachel dialing in from Cheltenham. We've got Rebecca coming in from Kildare in Ireland. Jamie's coming in from Sheffield. Jana's coming in from London. VJ is coming in from India, and Martin's in Darlington. It's getting quite busy in there. We've got Mark coming in from Newcastle, Simon also from Newcastle, Claude from Monmouth, and Paul from Manchester. So yeah, quite a variety in the chat room today.
Yeah, it's quite a range of different locations. So quite a range of different locations. So if you would like to put that into the chat room and introduce yourself, would be great. And I'd like to ask a question now of the audience, and that is, as a customer, when was the last time that you were asked for feedback? You're thinking of yourself as a customer. So it'd be interesting. Dan, do you get asked for feedback very often?
All the time. And actually, since we started the call, I just received an email about 10 minutes ago from Marriott asking for my feedback on my stay recently in the US.
Interesting. And is that after every stay you get a feedback questionnaire?
I do indeed, yep, every time I stay. Interestingly, it's a bit delayed. So actually, I checked out a week ago, so it's a bit late. But yeah, always for each stay with Marriott, I get a little email.
And Sam, have you had any feedback recently that you've been asked for?
Yeah, again, one of the upsides of staying in hotels a lot is that I get a lot of surveys from hotels, and I also had a pretty extensive one from John Lewis recently asking me to review their click and collect service, which got favourable reviews.
Very good, very good. I get asked for feedback a great deal, and every time I report a problem with my internet provider, I get a survey, and I guess one of the challenges we'll be looking at later is survey fatigue. With if you're being asked all the time, the first time is quite a novelty, but after you issue something and nothing much seems to happen as a result, you start to wonder about how much benefit there is in keeping responding.
Jonty, I have seen some people with companies such as McDonald's, Burger King, KFC that actually incentivise giving you feedback. It's on the receipt, on the back of the receipt. A lot of the time, if you order chips and a burger, it might be, here's a link to our survey and fill it out, and then you'll get a free promotional code for something, like free chips or a drink or something like that, which is quite an interesting idea. You obviously have to turn over the receipt to see it a lot of the time, but there is a customer incentive there for filling out the survey.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Have we got any feedback from the chat room on what people are saying?
Rachel's saying a lot of restaurants hand over cards with the server's name in terms of getting surveys in. Paul has said almost every online purchase that he makes, he actually gets offers for asking for feedback a few days later. And Martin said most places do really, even eBay. I know I get quite a lot off Amazon, just something that pings through, the next day or next couple of days, just saying, how did you find your product? How is it for you?
It's interesting with a lot of the peer-to-peer stuff. A lot of the credibility of the peer is not based on your interesting concept.
Interesting. We were just losing, got a bit of a buzz on your line there, Dan, so didn't quite catch that last comment. Do you want to repeat it?
I was just stating that with the emergence of peer-to-peer businesses, where you're able to rate other people who are essentially not that you're not rating the business, you're rating the other user. So eBay is a good example where sellers are rated and customers are rated.
Yes, no, that's a very valid point there. I think the survey fatigue is quite interesting. I was listening on Radio 4 to a program that said one of the reasons why the polling in the general election we had last year got it wrong was actually that people aren't responding to polls in the same way they did before. Oh, I'm delighted to be asked my opinion, because now people are being asked their opinions all the time.
Mm. And I think it's, to Dan's point, I think it's interesting. I know I use Airbnb a lot, and you're kind of forced then to write a response, but you've got some personal investment in writing a response and then getting viewed as well. So I think it's when we know that our response is going to get acknowledged, or it actually has a point to it, then I think we're more likely to start contributing to surveys and responses.
Indeed. Well, we've reached the top of the hour, so I'm going to start the webinar now. Delighted to introduce everyone to our New Look webinar program, and we're going to be starting off with a new format, which is our Ask the Expert webinar, which is about building customer feedback into the contact center. And this is your chance in the audience to put your questions into the chat room, and we'll be asking questions of our experts. And delighted to have a lovely panel today. Delighted to introduce to you Dan Moross from Moo. Dan, for people who've just joined us, do you want to give a quick recap on what Moo does as a business?
Sure. So we are a design-focused online business stationery printer, primarily selling business cards. We're a global online business with offices in the US and the UK, and I manage a contact team of about 80 people speaking 5 different languages. Yes,
and I really love the design of some of the business cards you do, and is it moo.com, the website?
That's correct. Yeah,
moo.com. So don't go off now, but after the webinar, you could have a look at moo.com. Also delighted to introduce to you Sam Richardson from Ember Services. Sam, this is the first webinar you've done for us, so welcome along. Do you want to, for people who aren't familiar with Ember, introduce yourself and your role within Ember?
Yep, sure. So at Ember Services, we're a business services group, and we specialise in customer management consultancy, and we're staffed entirely by practitioners. I would say seasoned practitioners, but I don't think my colleagues will thank me for aging them too much. But we work with a whole range of clients on from sort of John Lewis to Birmingham City Council, working on target operating models, customer engagement, customer experience, and their overall customer strategy as well. So my role within Ember is very varied, but given my experience, I tend to focus on customer feedback, customer management, voice of the customer programs.
Indeed, excellent. And we've also joined by Megan Jones. Megan, you're going to be monitoring the chat room today.
Yes, I am. I'm very excited to see what people have to say on this topic today. So, yeah, keep posting your comments into the chat room, and I'll be reading them out.
And have we got anyone dialed in from any? We've got a large number of people from the UK, but we do pick up people from other countries. Have we got anyone dialed in today from?
Yeah, we've got Hannah's coming in from Ethiopia, and Paul's coming in from Toronto. We have a few more people also dialing in from the UK in the last few minutes, and Martin from Manchester and Kate from Oxford. Yeah, we're getting the chat room starting to get quite busy, so we'll see who else is coming in the next few minutes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, a little bit of housekeeping. You can see that you're all logged into the chat room, so if you've got a question you'd like to raise, just type hashtag question for a question, and if you've got a tip, type hashtag tip for a tip, and we'll be awarding a bottle of champagne to the best tip we've got coming through. And I'd like to ask a question of the audience. How do you, in your contact center, currently collect feedback? For instance, do you do call monitoring? Do you do analytics? Is it a post-call IVR survey? Which method do you do? So if you'd like to just type into the chat room now, how do you currently collect feedback? So while we're waiting for the audience to type that in, Dan, how do you currently collect feedback at Moo?
So we have a bunch of different ways, depending on whether it's call center specific feedback or if it's just kind of business wide or product wide feedback. So we have a customer satisfaction email that goes out post solution of either an email or a phone call. We also, in our live chat application, customers can give a rating and leave a comment. And then we also have a post-purchase survey, which is sent out 2 to 3 days after the estimated arrival date of the order. But then on top of that, we do have kind of periodical brand awareness and engagement surveys where we're surveying just the marketplace, but also customers. And then finally, we also do a lot of focus groups. So we've got a user experience team at Move who do a lot of stuff in the field with users using the site or just kind of focus group sessions.
So you've got quite a comprehensive program for collecting customer feedback. Sounds like you're very, very close to your customers.
We like to think so, yeah.
Yeah, I guess because if you're primarily online, you're not necessarily having lots of day-to-day interactions with people in stores. So it's probably very important because it can be quite silent, the online world in a way.
Yeah, and I think the emergence of new things like Trustpilot and other kind of public review things expose you more to that, and also expose your customer base to other people's feedback. And we're toying with the idea of things like customer forums online. So again, to kind of just share it, peers sharing with each other their experience. And we do a bit of social listening on Facebook and Twitter and stuff as well, which is obviously more of a public forum. I think the danger with it is, you end up with, in some cases, too much from too many different places, that it's hard to aggregate it together and build, the perfect view is really tough. It's a tough challenge, but a good one.
Yeah, excellent. And Megan, have we got any? What are the audience saying about how they?
Well, everyone seems to have a say on how they're doing things at the moment, which is good to hear. We've got Teresa's doing call monitoring. Laura's just we've got a survey that goes out. Pat's saying there's an online survey. There's quite a variety of comments here, from post-call SMS surveys, analytics and email surveys, call monitoring post-calls, quite an interesting one there from Sunel. We've also got email surveys, external third-party surveyor online and by SMS. That's coming from Mark. Perhaps be interested to find out how that works in a bit more detail. We've also got JB saying an email survey once a support ticket is closed, with a monthly prize draw of £20. That's quite an interesting idea, Jonty, actually just following up once the issue or the sale has been resolved, rather than midway through when I expect you to get a less positive response.
Yeah, and certainly with the monthly prize draw, there seems to be at least some degree of incentive for filling in the survey. Have we got any others there?
Yeah, we've got another comment in from Rebecca, who's doing voice of the customer surveys. Paul seems to have quite a variety, from post-call, web and email surveys, and also monitors the voice of the agent and quality as well. Sabina says our surveys are carried out 48 to 72 hours after the call, as the information we require concerns the service. Kathy is currently using MPS and after-call emails. Craig is saying post-resolution surveys and active social media monitoring and engagement. We've got a few more comments in. Call monitoring, email survey, agent lead surveys, collected complaints is quite an interesting one there from Joanne. And Paul is saying MPS client and employee surveys, as well as annual engagement surveys. So really spreading the feedback there across agents and customers to get a big view of what exactly is happening is quite interesting there.
Thank you. That sounds like quite a variety there. Sam, I heard Net Promoter Score come up a number of times. Do you think there's a danger that people start to guess the guess the Net Promoter question as being perhaps the key one that people are looking for?
Yeah, perhaps, but I think you also need to be careful where you use it and make sure that you're using it in the most relevant place as well. Where genuinely, it means something rather than just being mistaken for something like customer satisfaction. So yeah, I think that it's been used so widely now, we kind of expect it, and people kind of expect it as a standard now. But my advice with that would be make sure that Net Promoter really is relevant for your brand.
So here's the first audience question we've got coming through, and which is quite interesting. What is the best method for collecting customer feedback? And we've seen that there seems to be a whole host of different types. But I guess, Dan, if there was one you were only allowed to collect customer feedback one way, what would that be?
I don't really think that there's a silver bullet, and I think that that one method will be very different for each different business or industry, perhaps. I think you need to pick what's most relevant to that specific interaction or to that customer. So, for us, we're running an online business. Then you want to try and harness that information online. If you've done something on your mobile, maybe it's an SMS survey. If it's in a physical environment, retail, maybe it's actually capturing it in the store. You want to make it as relevant to the customer or that specific interaction as possible, I think.
Yeah, I probably agree with that. Do you, Sam, do you believe there's a silver bullet?
No, I agree with Dan. You need to just tailor it really to make sure that it's relevant to the customer and also convenient for the customer as well. So I recently flew long haul, for example, and I got text messages as soon as I landed from the airport, from the airline. Now, A, that's going to cost me, and B, I don't necessarily want to respond the minute I've just got off a long haul flight. So I think it's absolutely, to Dan's point, it's about making it relevant. I mean, post-call IVR surveys tend to get pretty good response rates, but again, it just depends how your customer's interacting with you to start with.
Interesting. Well, we're going to jump into a question from Zoe. Let me just put this up on the screen. The question from Zoe is, do you have any experience of how different cultures respond to ratings on surveys? For instance, is there a best practice in Germany to state what scale to use? For instance, would 5 be excellent in Germany, or is 1 considered excellent? So, Sam, I don't know if you've got any feeling for how survey varies across geographies.
Yeah, I've worked with a number of clients who've got multi-country and multicultural deployments of a customer experience program. Absolutely, they vary. Dan and I were talking about this before, actually, because South America tends to score quite high, for example, whereas the Asian countries not so much. And even within Europe, there are many differences. Again, Zoe's absolutely right. In some areas, a 5 is seen as excellent, whereas in others a 5 is seen as not so good. I think really having that local knowledge is the most important thing, really understanding your geography, your area and the culture, and knowing what works best. The other thing with these multi-country programs that I've seen, ask core questions your dashboard and to your KPIs, but then give each of the countries the ability to ask their own regional questions and cultural questions, and ask them in their own way as well, because again, one size just doesn't fit all when you're managing these complicated multi-country programs.
And thank you, Dan. Do you do support a number of different European languages? Do you have to alter your survey methodologies to fit that in?
So we haven't, but I would say that we probably should. The first step is getting it in the right language, and for some people that's quite a big hurdle. And then you have to deal with also then the fact that the feedback's in another language. So if you don't have people kind of involved in the program internally that speak that language, then it's hard to digest that feedback. As for cultural differences, we certainly see some differences in how different countries score. And now reading the question, it could be that we're asking with the wrong scale. So maybe we're doing really, really well, and it's the opposite way around. But I think, as with the first question, you have to tailor to suit your customer, and where it makes sense, and you've got a lot of customers in a particular region or speaking a specific cultural language, if you like, then it's important to tailor it to them.
Yeah, and I guess on the specific point about the scale of 1 to 5, I think that's one of the things I like is that with a star system, is that you can see 5 stars visually comes out as much easier to follow, which is an interesting way around. Well, here's a question we've been sent in by Emily, And Emily says, I'd be really interested to know what the panelists feel is the most effective way to issue customer feedback to agents, good and bad. We rarely get an equal amount of feedback for all agents, so it can feel a bit one-sided sometimes if it's issued publicly. Do you think it would be more beneficial to record feedback over a period of time and build it into one-to-ones?
Personally, I think it's a mix, and it depends on the type of feedback and what it's regarding. In our CSAT, for example, we don't pick out every single nice bit of feedback for agents from CSAT and share it publicly. But when we receive an email just into our normal support queue or some specific praise to a manager about a specific agent, we'll normally send a group email around kind of praising that. And certainly when it's negative feedback, and again, talking about the balance that's really important, we don't really like to air dirty laundry in public. We'd prefer to keep that for one-to-one. So I think it's a mix of both, certainly.
Sam, do you have any views on this? It'd be interesting to also, if anyone in the audience has got any views, if they'd like to express those in the chat room. Sam, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, again, I agree with Dan. You have to be quite careful about it, but customer feedback can also be very powerful in an organisation and help the culture. I've seen some great programs whereby the agent is so engaged and looking forward to receiving their feedback that they actively go out and search for it. I worked with an organisation as well that asked a really interesting question, and I think it was based on something that Zappos did. So they asked their customers what advice they would give to the agent that dealt with their call. And what career advice they would give, and they got some great responses from that. And again, it really helped the agents buy into the whole program, and helped really increase that monthly, customer satisfaction score that they got. The other thing I'd say though is be careful that you're not giving the agents responsibility beyond their span of control. So it's fine asking them a question about how they did personally and how they interacted, but if you start asking wider questions that aren't necessarily relevant to them, then they can soon become pretty despondent about it, because of course whilst it can be a powerful coaching tool for them, again, if it's not in their span of control to influence, then it becomes a bit meaningless, really. So I think that there's a few things to watch out for there, but certainly building it into the monthly one-to-ones is a great way to use the feedback.
Indeed, and Megan, have we had any interesting feedback from the chat room on this issue?
Yeah, we've had one or two comments come in. Pat said we try to get all positive feedback to the agents that does come in, as we find it helps with agent engagement. And Kate says we share what was said, but not who the feedback was about unless it's really good, and then we say who it was for, and they're celebrated. And one idea I came across in one call centre I visited was they actually had a notice board up on the call centre floor, and every time a good customer comment did come in, it was printed off, and a nice border was put around it, and it was pinned on this notice board, and they were just collected, and it was just a positive reminder to everyone that it might be hard on some shifts sometimes, but there's a reason that you go to work every day, and these customers do appreciate the effort that you put in, and really, rather than paying attention to the individual agents, creating this collective wall of just celebrating the good comments the business has received as a whole. And I thought that was really lovely, and it's constantly being updated, and just a positive reminder on the call centre floor of how things should be and why you're all there. So
yeah, I love those compliments boards, and they are very, very cheap and very cost effective to put up, and people love it when that feedback comes up and that recognition is shared.
We actually, sorry, I just add one other nugget of stuff that we do at Moo. So we have, I mentioned social listening before, but when we get nice comments about specific agents on social media, but also via NPS verbatim feedback, we have a spot award program. So at the end of the month, we put out all of the name mentions and nice feedback, and then we have like a £5 Amazon voucher for every nice personalised bit of feedback that people get.
Oh, wow.
Okay, we've actually had a few extra comments. Sorry, in the chat room, Mike said we share all of our feedback, good and bad, with everyone. Most agents want to see the negative responses to query how they could have handled the call better, but we also encourage them to look at the positive responses and spot the things they did well that they can repeat and see the positive impact they had on the customer. Paul said we provide real-time CSAT feedback direct to the agents, and that has led to a rise in quality scores, especially around building rapport and empathy. And Rach said British Gas share their positive feedbacks on note cards, which appear on a tree at the end of groups of desks. So really recognising the team's efforts there and potentially promoting team bonding as well. There's just quite a few good ideas coming in now.
So some fabulous feedback on there, some great ideas. Here's an interesting question sent in by Simon, and it says, has anyone experimented with increasing the delay between the interaction and survey? The idea being this gives a greater opportunity for promises to fulfill or processes to fail. It is possible to relate this back to the individual agent interactions. Dan, you mentioned earlier that you'd had some feedback from a hotel stay of a week ago, so which I don't think you felt was the optimum time. Have you experimented with time delays?
We have. So we you know, as I said, we're an online business, and essentially we're all our product is a physical product that's being sent out in traditional mail services. And in the old days of Moo, we tried to kind of give a prediction based on when someone placed an order of when we thought they might receive their order, and then kind of that was a trigger to when we'd actually send the survey. But as we've evolved, you know, you start to see a lot of people saying, "Why are you asking me for feedback? I haven't received it yet." Was quite a common thing. So we've made it a bit more, I guess, sensible would be the right word, where we actually have a much better way of predicting the estimated arrival date based on a specific carrier, the country that it's going to. So we actually now are, and we're always kind of toying with it, there's certain regions where we've extended it a little bit. But essentially you want to make sure, like the question states, you know, that the customer has achieved the goal essentially of what your business does, you know, that they've received the product, if it's a product that they have to use, there's no point in sending it if they've just received it. You want to wait until they've used the product. So certainly that's relevant.
And Sam, it seems quite interesting because, you know, I get asked for feedback on did the agent solve your problem? The agent was certainly very helpful, but I can't tell if the problem's solved till you know, a couple of days later.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's about making it relevant for the customer again, I guess, and being quite clever with your data. But Dan's absolutely right. You know, you need to tie it in so that if it takes sort of 7 days for a letter to go out to know if you've adjusted a bill properly. I worked with a telco, and we did exactly that. You know, we looked at 7 days and 14 days in order to get the information that we really needed, which was your query resolved first time. So yeah, absolutely. And there's no harm in you know, trying different length of time, but I think you have to be quite smart about your data and understand your data to start with, and to Dan's point, understand the transaction that's happening so that you can tell, all right, is 7 days relevant, is 14 days relevant, or in fact just 2 days later, is that relevant?
And indeed, on a similar theme, Mark's question is, when and how many times should you poll your customers? I guess if you do it too often, you're likely to get survey fatigue coming in. Dan, do you have is there an optimum amount that you, so I'm not going to do a survey within a certain period of time of a previous one?
So it depends on whether it's a customer satisfaction survey or an NPS one. For us, they're treated very differently. I think in relation to the contact center, you know, you want to get a rating for each interaction. Now, if an interaction takes 4 different channels over 4 days, then obviously you don't want to do it after each channel interaction. You want to wait till that issue as a whole is resolved before you're asking that question. So we've tried to, you know, look at the data that we've got to understand what's going to cover 95% of the interaction cycles, if you like, or the mix of channels. But we don't have any hard rules, like if you've emailed this customer for feedback in this month, but then at the end of the month they've got a different query. You know, we want to know, did we handle that second query well? But I think there's an interesting one around kind of a repeat purchase activity. We do have a corporate side of our business where we have an account manager or an admin for a particular business who's ordering cards all the time. And for those, it's pretty pointless. You know, they might place 40, 50 orders in a month. The cards aren't always for them.
Yeah.
So we've adopted a bit of a slightly different one where we're actually surveying them. If they purchase in a month, we'll survey them at the end of the month, and that gives it a bit more sensible.
That seems to be very very sensible. Megan, any feedback from the audience?
Not specifically on this question, but there was a few comments about the benefits of having some kind of time delay in place. I know there was a comment earlier on that was basically saying if you ring back for feedback immediately after a call, it's going to be how the agent handled the call that's in the forefront of their mind rather than the whole experience. So perhaps leaving 48 hours seems to be the magic number on that front. There's a few people saying 48 hours. There is a comment in here from Simon that says, we have found our post-SMS survey delivered within 10 minutes of the call finishing generates excellent NPS. Delay that survey by 7 days and suddenly the cracks begin to appear. It's the difference between measuring the promise versus the truth. And in general, delaying is far better for process feedback, but very hard to use and assign back to a given agent. Would you agree with that, Dan? Do you think that rings true in different organisations?
I think that's certainly true. And I think this ties again to whether it's, are you wanting feedback on the agent or are you wanting feedback on the business? You know, if it's the agent, you want it quick and snappy. If it's the business, you want it to kind of, you want the whole experience to be taken into account.
Okay. I had a comment in from Joanne that said, because we deal with a lot of older customers, leaving a bigger gap may mean they don't really remember the call, and that's something that they take into consideration with their target audience. Mark said, time delays, yes, I measure immediate feedback and then follow it up a week later to see whether there has been any difference to the original feedback to try and gain an understanding as to why the customer may have altered their opinion. Sam, what do you think of that doubling up on the feedback to get engaged on it? Do you think that's harassing the customers a bit too much or quite valuable in some respects?
I think it depends how engaged your customer base is, and it goes back to the last question that was asked. You know, we need to be, and I suppose it goes back to that question right at the top of the hour. It's an imposition on customers' time to be asking for feedback all the time, and we really need to manage that, because whilst they might respond to one or two, if we want to keep getting that feedback, then we really need to have more of a strategy in place about how often you measure your customers or measure their feedback. So you know, I would always advise having a strategy in place to put some rules in so that you're not exhausting your customers by over surveying them. I mean, it could be that customers are happy to be surveyed twice in the space of a week, but I would just always be mindful of the imposition that you're asking customers to contribute for free mostly. So I would always be mindful of that imposition.
Okay, now it's just
an interesting tip in from Kate. And Kate has said, we've been asking customers whose calls were not handled within the service level time how they found the service, so that we can decide if the service levels we have in place are the right ones. I think it's quite fascinating, because so many contact centres I see have 80% of calls answered within 20 seconds, and you ask why that's the case. They say that's the industry average, and you can apparently trace this back to about, I think it's about 1970, when one telephone company thought that would be quite a good number to use. That's the conventional wisdom, whether indeed it makes any sense or not. Sam?
Yeah, slightly off topic, but there is a tipping point by which some industries people are prepared to wait for a long time and others just aren't, and we see that all the time. So, but I think measuring, this is a really powerful way to use your customer surveys. If you're looking at a particular project or a particular initiative, being able to use your data to select a customer group and surveying them is a really great way to start using that feedback from customers.
Indeed, and we've had a comment sent in by Paul, an opinion. Daniel Kahneman describes the remembering self and describes how emotional impact is inversely proportional to the time since the touch point. Therefore, the earlier the better, unless you want to massage the results, i.e. later you survey, the better your score has been proven. So I thought it's quite interesting there. So I guess if you've not been scoring too well, then delaying that might improve. Some quite fascinating there. So we've got a question from Simon. Simon says, how many people call back their dissatisfied or detractor customers? What's your approach, and what are the pitfalls of that? Dan, do you call back dissatisfied customers?
We don't jump straight on the phone. We do have anyone who leaves us a comment and gives us a detractor score, or is dissatisfied with our customer support. We have kind of some senior agents or team leads that reach out to those customers via email. You know, unless it's something that we feel is completely irretrievable. I think it's very important. I mean, we've got someone who's quite senior at Moo who works at Zipcar, and they actually made senior management outside of the call center the team that dealt with phoning, and they used to have to phone the customer, and that they claimed that the power in retrieving customers or winning back customers was huge, but also it helps the people doing the outbound call to understand just how frustrating the service can be. So it's a good agitator internally as well, I think.
Mm.
That's interesting, Sam. Have you had any experience of whether you should call customers back?
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful thing to do. It absolutely builds the relationship between you and the customer if you're out there, you know, if you actually respond to something that they say. There's nothing more frustrating than as a customer giving some feedback and then it going absolutely nowhere. This happened to me recently with a very well-known global electronics company, and they just didn't respond at all, and they didn't respond to my tweets either. And I think that's probably another important part of this. It's not just about the surveys, but in general, you know, listening isn't necessarily managing. And you know, again, if you've got the ability to type that data so that you can see if the customer is responding, they're a detractor on your survey, what are they doing in terms of their social media as well, then that becomes very powerful. But absolutely, if you've got that feedback loop and you can close that loop on customers that are detractors, then it becomes incredibly powerful. But I think it's, to Dan's point, it's great to have senior managers involved, as long as you make sure that it is, of course, the right senior manager. I've seen a few rogue CEOs jump in sometimes when they've seen something and do more harm than good. So I think it's a good thing to have that accountability and that structure in place.
And can anyone in the audience have had any feedback on calling people back?
Yeah, there's been a comment in from Mike that says, we seek to make contact with dissatisfied customers and have had some very positive responses as a result. And it's also said, I think if you don't respond, you discourage them from replying to future surveys, as they'll feel it's a waste of time, a bit like what you were saying there, Sam. You probably wouldn't go out of your way to give them feedback, good or bad, in the future, whoever that technology company was. Yeah.
In many respects, I think it's a bit of a safety net, the feedback survey. It's the people that don't call you when there's a problem, the ones that are falling through the net. And if you don't have that bucket to kind of help catch them and put them back in the funnel, if you like, put them back in the mix, then you're just risking losing more and more customers.
Yeah, I think it shows how strong you are as a company. You know, if you can sort of face up to it and ring the customer and take that information on the chin and then do something with it, I think that gives an incredibly strong signal as to how healthy you are as an organisation.
Indeed. Well, here's another question that we've been sent in. And what has been your experience of SMS feedback? Dan, have you ever done text messaging, or have had experience of this?
So we don't do any SMS feedback at the moment because it's slightly less relevant to the service that we provide. but I receive them often. I actually had a really great experience recently, and I must say, just even outside of just feedback, but SMS in general, I bought a sofa from DFS, and pretty much on leaving the store, I had something asking for feedback on the salesperson, and then I also got as soon as I'd completed that, I had a follow-up text, essentially just keeping me in the loop on the progress of my order, and the experience has been amazing from an SMS standpoint. But going back to the question right at the beginning, I think SMS is relevant if it's relevant to the customer. I certainly find it annoying if I get an SMS question about something that I've done, either a long time ago or via a channel where SMS is a bit redundant.
I had some problems recently where I'd got a delivery coming through, and from a well-known high street retailer that has a very good food outlet, and ordered some products from them, and they'd put in a number. They said, please put in the best number to contact you on, which for this delivery was a weekend. It's the home number. So then the call center then started to text my home number, which was quite interesting. Now we've also got a call screening product called the Call Guardian, which didn't let the messages coming through. So we were just getting constantly buzzed by this system that was not able to leave a message. So we just ended up with lots of the phone bleeping a great deal. And then when I phoned the call center, they were, because it had already gone out to the courier, they were unable to change that. So that was one example where there should have been some mechanism to recognise if the number was a mobile number. Sam, any experiences yourself on SMS?
Yeah, I'll go back to my experience that I mentioned earlier, because you need to make it relevant. The last thing I want to be doing is spending money SMSing back an airline for my feedback when I've just landed after a long haul flight. But then equally, I had my hub changed recently, my broadband hub, and the SMS, not only did they keep me up to date with all the progress via SMS, but then the surveying via SMS was, it was quick, it was short. They asked exactly what they needed to know, and so I was far more inclined to respond. But it's about relevance.
Yeah, there does seem to be quite a hit and miss response in the chat room here. Mark said SMS is by far the most insightful for him and provides very quick responses. But Joanne said on the flip side, she saw a really bad one recently. The company sent an SMS message that was a no reply text and asked you to call another telephone number to leave your feedback. I think that's where it starts getting a bit silly and just a bit too much effort for anyone to bother, really.
Sometimes they have a link in them that you have to follow, in which case you have to go online. That's also frustrating.
Yeah, I get messages when my phone bill's due. It's slightly off topic, but to access the bill itself, I have to click a link inside the text message and hope it all works and then log in, and I just never bother. I get these text messages that say my bill's due. It doesn't tell me anything useful, and it's more effort than it's worth to try and click through. And I imagine if that came through in a survey format, to click through to something else, to fill in something else, I just wouldn't bother and I'd ignore it the same way I do with my phone bill text messages. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just too much effort and a bit too silly there, I think.
And Paul's asked the question, if anyone on text messages has seen an increase in response rates over email. So it'd be interesting to know if text seems to be quite immediate. It's typically a question, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate the advisor today? So it's not a lot of effort to text that back.
Yeah, the same could be said though of email now in terms of having them on smartphones. I know the way my phone's set up, I get text message, WhatsApp messages, emails all popping through in the same manner now. So clicking reply to a text is just as much effort for me as clicking reply to an email if it's a one-word answer, I suppose. So I'm not sure if smartphones have changed that.
No, and I think text also comes out of your minutes. So there's probably a cost, albeit most people have got massive amounts of allowance. But there is a slight cost impact to doing that.
I think there are some stats about speed of response, so it might not necessarily contribute to the amount of response, but certainly how quickly you might get that feedback from the customer. So in the DFS example, maybe knowing that feedback, the salesman could have run out after me and stopped me in the street. Or if you're at the end of a train journey, maybe someone can meet you at, out of the terminal if they know who you are or something. But I think it's like most text messages are read and replied to within 5 minutes or something, and emails is 4 hours or something like that. Big difference.
Indeed. Well, here's a fascinating question. What is the ideal number of questions to ask on a customer satisfaction survey? So it'd be interesting to know if there's a Goldilocks effect here, that perhaps one is too few and 105 is too many.
105.
Dan, have you found that there's a Goldilocks effect on customer satisfaction surveys?
My personal mantra is just short and sweet. You will get a lot more responses if it's short, and you'll I also think you don't want to lead the witness, so asking really super specific questions is often too much. On our CSAT stuff, it's just was it good or was it bad, and then a comment box, and then for our NPS feedback survey is just NPS question, and then basically why.
That does sound very sweet. You get a very good response rate then, presumably.
Yeah, I mean on our CSAT stuff we're just over 30% on all channels, and then for our NPS we're probably around 10 to 15% depending on the market.
Wow, that sounds very good. Sam, any Goldilocks number you think that fits in? Mark has said 3, he believes.
Yeah, I think about 5 is the maximum that you would want to go if you're doing a transactional survey. But again, this is the difference between a transactional and a relationship survey. If you're running an NPS program and doing that annual relationship survey, and especially with perhaps some of your business customers, then you can afford to ask slightly more questions, but certainly don't exhaust them. I saw one retailer actually who they asked the 3 questions that they wanted to ask, and then politely asked me as a customer if I in fact had enough, or would I be prepared to answer some more questions. And then they took me through and I answered some more questions. So it was quite nice to be advised, to be asked if I wanted to spend more time answering their questions. And of course I said yes, because they asked so nicely. Nothing puts you off more, well, certainly for me, I don't think anything puts me off more than seeing a message saying, this will only take you 10 minutes to answer. And I think, wow, okay.
I was going to say, it's almost more important that you set the expectations early, because there's nothing worse than getting into something and then finish. If it's going to be 3 questions, tell them it's going to be 3 questions before they even start it, and they know what they're getting themselves into.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, the chat room's been going a bit mad on this one. Paul said 5 responses, and Mark said it's got to be 3 for me, not too little and not too many. Kathy's agreeing that a maximum of 5 questions is about right. Quite interestingly, Jamie's saying I'd say 3, but I was recently sent an online survey, and after about question 6 of 12, I gave up and closed the window, resulting in the company receiving no answers whatsoever. Mike said we limit our surveys to just 5 questions, but another horror story had one recently which asked 18 questions, which was just way too much.
I think this is about. Sorry, Meg. I think this goes back to how you manage data as well, because I think what organisations do is, because they don't manage their data properly, they ask all customers all questions. Whereas if you've got a good strategy for that, then you can ask specific customer segments specific questions and get much richer feedback.
To that point, we use currently a text analytics platform within the survey. We don't actually use this functionality, but we can actually make it that if someone leaves a specific comment, you can literally the text analytics will pull that out straight away. So if I've said the shipping was awful, the next question can be, more specifically, what was it about the shipping service that you didn't like? Which means that it's completely dynamic and kind of tailored to that person. Is an interesting emerging technology, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
There's a few more responses in the chat room. Nicholas has said a clipped survey of 2 or 3 general questions that invite an open response and provide the opportunity to give more detailed feedback. But of course, there's a bit of a risk that it's not always utilised. And Joanne said keep the survey as short as possible. I was researching surveys and actually found one with 29 questions and couldn't even be bothered to start the survey. So yeah, short and sweet seems to be the overall response there, with a few horror stories thrown in. So stay away from that one.
We've had a couple of tips that have come through. Paul has said, I found the best and most useful client comments were as close to the service solution as possible while it's still fresh in their minds. We've got a tip from Mike that says, make sure your survey does not ask mandatory questions. Because I guess if people don't want to answer that question, then you're almost excluding people, particularly if it's not relevant to them.
On a similar note to that, something that I think customers hate is when you ask questions that you already know the answers to. So, thanks for buying from us, fill in this survey. What did you buy from us? You should know all of that stuff about them already.
Yeah.
That's where I think Amazon have got it right at the moment. I had to complain about a product, or I think there was a survey that came through, and they knew exactly what I was talking about, and it was all guided, and just it all popped up that they knew these are the 5 products you bought recently, which one is this regarding, and I just got to click the one that it was, and it just kept clicking through like that. It used the information it had on the system to make it really easy for me, and I really appreciated that.
We've got a comment from Mike who said he had a survey recently from a cinema chain which asked whether the toilets were okay. As I hadn't used them, wanted to answer not applicable, but that wasn't an option, so I had to answer it. So I then had to give them the lowest rating. It's one of the, seems like quite madness there to have mandatory questions on that.
I think it goes back to our general theme, which is know your customers, know your data, and ask the relevant questions. And the amount of time I get asked if I'm male or female, and I think, well, why does that matter?
Yeah, no, it does seem very odd, some of the questions overall. We've had a tip from Paul. Paul says, always give a free text or speech comments question and use a word cloud to review the most popular words. You can get really insightful overview of the client experience. You can focus your root cause analysis around them, and it can also provide your call center with a really tangible overview of the performance, which our advisors bought into. That's certainly one way of filtering out verbatim comments there, Sam.
It's definitely a very cost-effective way of analysing the comments. You don't have to have tons of people reading the comments, and you don't have to buy any snazzy equipment to categorise them for you, or any text analytics. It's very general, but it's definitely a good starting point, in my opinion.
Yeah, a couple of more tips before we get on to the next question. Make it about the customer's experience of the journey that they've gone through. I think that's always keep the customer experience in mind. And from Kate, it's nice to offer a callback if they want to talk about the service, good and bad. So rather than necessarily contact them, make that as a sort of an optional. Would you like a callback? Any experience on those?
Yeah, I think it's nice to offer that, especially if you've got a detractor and they particularly want to talk about, I mean, we make this assumption that all customers are really interested in our companies and our brands, and it's just not the case. Some people just aren't that into the brand really. They've left you a survey, but they don't really want to be contacted by you. But I think when you get positive comments, it's also great to ask the customer if they're happy for that to be shared on Facebook or on Twitter, and use that power of the promoter. Through your social media channels, and also even on your website. One of our clients, a shirt retailer, a really good shirt retailer, actually, they publish their surveys online, or they publish their results online. So there's always a tracker, both good and bad, as to customer feedback, which is quite brave. They're doing very well because they're a very good company, but but yeah, that's another interesting way of using the feedback and asking customers if they're happy to share their comments.
I love that example of putting customer feedback online. I think that's great. Sabina's asked a question: is it better to separate the surveys, have one for agents and then one for process? I think, Dan, you alluded to providing separate surveys.
Yeah.
Depending what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think it depends what you mean by process, of whether it's a company-wide or kind of for us it would be the online process, the checkout experience, and all of that stuff we leave in our NPS survey. So we have essentially a overall customer experience survey, which covers everything, and then we have an agent or customer support survey. But I think with the process survey or the overall survey, you also do want to leave it slightly open-ended. You know, you don't want to be leading the witness into a specific thing. And this is kind of related to the point before about how many questions you have. The more questions you have, the more specific they are. And the more, you know, if you pick things out for comments, you're kind of fishing for either compliments or criticism. In a way, you want to know what's most important to the customer. But yeah, I think it's depending on the business, for us, it's certainly important to split overarching feedback, product, website, service, and then very specific kind of agent-based support feedback. Keep them separate.
Sam, do you have a view?
Yeah, I agree, and it comes back to this, you know, have a strategy about what you're doing. Don't just survey randomly. Really think about what it is you're doing, who you want to survey, how you want to survey, and mostly what you're going to do with the information. Because if you're not going to do anything with the information, then it's almost, I'm not going to say it's pointless, but it's not as useful, and there's not a huge amount of a point to doing it or investing your money in it. But I think, yeah, you know, absolutely have a strategy and have an approach and know what you're going to do with each of the individual surveys.
And I guess tied into that question from Hannah is it recommended to depend only on the satisfaction survey results, ignoring the internal KPIs while measuring agents' performance? Sounds like a tricky one. I don't know if Dan, if you've got a view on that.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It cut out a little bit for me there.
Yeah, the question is it recommended to depend only on the satisfaction survey result, ignoring internal KPIs while measuring agent performance? So I guess this is maybe, you know, ignoring things like the time the agent was on the call and, you know, focusing on what the customer gave as a score.
Yeah, so I mean, we do a lot of call monitoring internally where we're ourselves are rating whether the agent did a good job. And you do see a bit of, you know, you'd expect that if your call scoring sheet or your email scoring sheet is measuring the right things, you'd expect there to be some correlation between what the customer thinks and what we think internally. I think where it gets a bit more murky is, you know, there are certain things as a business you can and can't do, you know, the policy or overarching rules of what your support agents can do. And often agents get marked down, so they might have handled the call brilliantly, but, you know, they still didn't do what I wanted them to do because Moo or whatever business wouldn't let the agent do it. Whereas in our internal scoring sheet, we'd say, well, they're following what's possible. You know, this is what the customer is asking for is not possible. So they've followed, if you like, the rule or what we would consider the rule. But I think, again, you know, it comes back to balance, and you have to use both. We actually rely. But both of those are in our one-to-one and regular reviews with agents, and one isn't more heavily weighted than the other.
Megan,
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's a lot fairer to split the feedback, and especially with energy companies, when, you know, the company as a whole puts its rates up and everyone's suddenly unhappy. You know, if it's just being collected in one pool of research, the agent could be doing a really great job, but because they were explaining to the customer that, you know, their bills were going up and the customer wasn't happy, you know, the agent's personal target could be compromised there, which is, I suppose, then really unfair if their commission and their personal targets are based around that as well. So I think separate's definitely the way forward in that sort of environment.
I think it's also worth remembering that people tend to respond to a survey if they're very happy about something or they're very unhappy about something. So it might not be entirely representative. So using all of the data within the organisation, and I think even some organisations have stopped surveying now and just are using all of the information and all of the activities like quality monitoring that exists within their organisation to use the voice of the customer and harness the voice of the customer information. So I think it's part of it should always be part of a wider suite of KPIs and of measures.
And that ties into a tip that Mark has sent through, which is don't ask for feedback if you're not going to act upon it. Keep it relative, of course. There's a danger that so many companies are awash with customer feedback. And they keep on asking for more, whereas actually acting on what they've got already would be a good start. Megan, anything in from the chat room of interest?
Yep, there's actually quite an interesting comment from Nicholas that talks about anonymity. So it seems like at least having the option of anonymity is important in collecting truly representative feedback, as the danger of the agent being biased would seem far too apparent. I suppose also it could stop the customer from saying what they truly feel. If they feel there might be some repercussion on their account or some personal risk to continue in the relationship with the company in the positive way. Dan, what do you think about anonymity?
Anonymities. I mean, it's an interesting one actually because we don't ask the customer to identify themselves to us.
Okay.
In that feedback, but I've never thought about this really before, and it's going to sound like we're being a bit shady, but we know who they are because we're linking them back to a ticket or to an order.
Okay.
But I think it depends on how scathing you're expecting customers to be, and I think it depends on your relationship with your customer base. We're a very sociable, helpful, honest, transparent company. So we get a lot of people actually just leaving their name at the end of their feedback anyway, because most of the time they're just saying how awesome we are. But
okay.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Well, a question in from Paul says, we've quite a mature voice of the customer program. We've proven a far greater response rate through an agent than through an automated offer. The only challenge we now have is agent bias. Agents not offering on poor calls. So does the panel have any ideas on how to mitigate agent bias?
It's tough. I mean, we've only ever gone down the automated route just because it's going to give you the most impartial. We have thought about doing things slightly differently. One route we were going to go down was using agent offering it if it was a win-back call, so resurveying customers if we thought we'd done something to win them back, and then finding out how we did basically on the win-back. Where we wanted agents to use their discretion. But I think if you want impartial and honest, you've got to go with some form of automation or some sort of quota or something for the agents.
I wonder, Sam, if this is a bit like the silver bullet question, that this is very good for getting a certain type of feedback, but you can't rely just on one method.
I think it's only good for measuring to see if you're good, measuring what you predicting the answer. I would always, as far as possible, advise against it, because agents then start, you start gaming it a bit, and I've seen many contact centre whereby agents have started saying, when you get a survey about me, it would be really good if you could say this, or even when I bought my car, it's the same thing. If you give me a 10 when you get asked a survey about me, then it's almost like bribery or emotional blackmail in some way. So I think that being unbiased and being random in your surveys is far more powerful.
Here we've had a comment in from Nicholas that says we have bonus linked to customer satisfaction, so the agent would be penalised if it wasn't offered to the customer if the call had to be longer than 3 minutes. And Simon said, I think agent promotion of the survey is incredibly dangerous and we actively discourage it. We're now using speech analytics to identify customers who are actively promoting the survey, and we found it only happens on positive transactional calls, which is quite interesting there.
Mm.
Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so we've got one quick question that we've got about 60 seconds to answer. Mike says, I've seen people mention very high response rates for feedback in web chat. What's a reasonable level to be aiming for? So in 1 or 2 words, Dan, what would be you think is a good survey response rate for web chat?
I think it depends on how it's surfaced in the chat and where it is, but we have it visible the whole time. I'd say about 30%, 20 to 30% in web chat, I'd expect.
Right. Sounds very, very high. Sam, have you got a...
Yeah, I think, again, it probably depends. It feels like a politician's answer. It probably depends on on the effectiveness of your web chat, your normal response rates. I think sort of 20% would be a pretty good response rate. I'd be fairly happy with that.
Wonderful. Well, we've just reached the top of the hour, so we'd like to do our own bit of survey, customer feedback. In 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about today's webinar? Though I guess, Dan, that's a leading question, isn't it? We probably ought to say, what did you like best or worse about today's webinar?
What did you think about today's webinar?
What did you think about today's webinar? There we are, unbiased. So if you'd like to type that into the chat box. Just a reminder that the replay and the slides are going to be available later on today. This is a summary of the questions will be put up. We're coming back in 2 weeks for the robots are coming. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to our 2 speakers. Thank you, Dan, for joining us from Moo.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to Sam for joining us from Ember Services.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good. It's a good format.
And Megan, thank you for joining us on the chat room today.
It's been nice to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you everyone for joining. And in 1 or 2 words, what is your feedback about today's webinar? So if you'd just like to put those into the chat room. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all again in 2 weeks' time. Bye-bye.